Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me? Yes. Well, Jack and Carol, once again, congratulations. Tough act to follow. We don't have any quotes, but we have lots of stories. So excited to be with you all today. As Jay mentioned, my name is Katie Collins. I've been a longtime fan of the foundation. Can you hear me? Yes? Sorry, two mics, I'm not sure which one I'm talking into. And I'm also a proud MetroWest resident, so it's an honor to be here today to moderate this panel. I think we've heard lots of words we'll talk about this morning, including inspiration, pathways, and doing something in this uncertain time. I think folks have referenced that a few times. So let's get started. I was gonna ask the panelists to introduce themselves, who they are, the organizations they're currently working with, and then how did you get started in a career in philanthropy? So Caroline, I'm gonna start with you.
Good morning, everyone. Caroline Murphy. I'm, as Jay said, the Vice President of Advancement and Philanthropic Services. I have had the pleasure and joy of working at the foundation for over 10 years now. And for me, it really started in my family. My family was my parents set a really, really important precedent for giving back and being involved in community. I had the privilege of going to the River School just down the road in Weston and doing our youth and philanthropy program as a high schooler, as a senior in 2002. And that really opened my eyes to the opportunity to work in this field. That was sort of, I knew finance, I knew teachers in my family, and just the opportunity to open my eyes to the fact that I could do this every day as a career and to give back to my own community was really empowering. So I started at the Boys and Girls Clubs of MetroWest. I've worked at a few other youth-serving nonprofits in the region here in MetroWest. I have not gone very far. I love this community and really, really pleased to be able to contribute at the foundation every day.
Hi, I'm Orson Watson. I've been an independent philanthropic advisor for the last 20 years. I specialize in working with people who want to take their giving to the next level and be more impactful and strategic. If I had to answer, how did I get into philanthropy? If you look at my resume, it looks like it's a bunch of series of very informed decisions, but it's a total lie. It was a bunch of accidents, and it just happened. And to that end, the quick story of how I got there, when I finished a Ph.D. in economic development. I was head of research for a nonprofit in Boston. I ended up managing their relationships with their major funders, which were large foundations. I got an eye in that and I said, oh, I like this. And so I ended up working, managing the relationships, and then when I went out on my own, I became a consultant to the large foundations. And I've since evolved into working with individual donors. You'll hear more about that later. Miki.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Miki Akimoto with the National Center for Family Philanthropy, and as Jay so nicely teed up, I am old in this field. All joking aside, much like you, I sort of learned philanthropy, although we didn't call it that from my parents, but just a way of being in the world, that we support those around us, that we are a we, not a me. But from a formal perspective, I sort of fell into a job, as you said, Orson, my career only makes sense in retrospect, but I fell into a job at AmeriCorps, and so I started philanthropy at the federal level of grant making at AmeriCorps. Jay was a site director for one of the programs in my portfolio, so that's how we got to know each other. From there, I moved on to roles at the Annie E. Casey Foundation and other organizations, and just thrilled to be here this morning with all of you.
Great. So let's start with you, Miki. Whether you're giving away a couple $100, a couple thousand, very fortunate, a couple million, how do you get started in either your philanthropic journey or maybe recalibrating your giving? Like, what do you see with the families or the individual donors you're working with as a successful model?
So there's a couple of things I would say. First of all, to say that for the National Center for Family Philanthropy, we did some research over the last couple of years. And what we found is that families that really are effective in their philanthropy embody 4 core principles. That's accountability, equity, relationships, and reflection and learning. And each of those has an internal and external component to the family. And I think what you see is that the journey starts in recognizing some of those and embedding them in your values. So to be more specific, what it often comes down to is a question of, what do we want our money to do for us? Why do we, we have money, we have means, how do we want this to be reflected in our lives? And that often leads to the recognition that we want to help make the world a better place. We want to make the communities around us stronger. And so how do we begin embodying that? So it's a conversation about values, putting those values into action, and then beginning to take on these questions of accountability, equity, and so forth.
Do you see any moments where folks have that kind of questioning of their values and that they come to you? Is it around a family meeting? Is it when folks just, they hit a moment in life where they have more to give away? Like, what are you seeing as that prompt for that kind of values conversation?
I would say it's often that moment of inflection. So it may be the inflection moment of recognizing, gosh, we have more money than we expected to ever have in our lives. You know, we've worked, for instance, with tech IPOs who, you know, are overnight billionaires, and you're like, oh gosh, now what do we do? It's also times the generational transition of recognizing that we have kids, we've got grandkids, that we really want to have a conversation about how we keep the family together, or we translate values across generations. And one way of thinking about that is philanthropy. So I think it's often those moments of inflection when something's changing in the world around you.
So Orson, you referenced this in your introduction, but I think it's an interesting story to share. So for many years, you were a consultant to institutional funders, so the likes of like the Ford Foundation, and then you took on a new client, I believe a family foundation, that sort of changed everything. And I think it's relevant for the audience here to understand and hear a little bit about that story.
I think the first thing I will say, the difference between when working at the Ford Foundation, you're not working with the Ford family. And that's a very big distinction. And if you've never done this, working for a large foundation is a great gig. It is a lot of fun. You work with very smart people, you go to great conferences, you're part of great learning communities, and because you have a checkbook, people always take your calls, right? So, you know, I went from that, but one of the things that was missing is, at a large foundation, the mission, vision, and values is set at the board level, and at the programmatic level, you're more implementing, you're not making those decisions. When I actually went to work with a family foundation with somebody who was at the beginning of their philanthropic journey, I found it was an opportunity for me to be more creative, and it was much more interesting. However, there are two things that I came away from that with that were sort of surprising to me. When I started working with individual donors, I discovered they not only weren't they having any fun, they were approaching the whole thing with a tremendous amount of anxiety. And to the point that I was like, okay, so why is this? Particularly since my orientation, where this is a blast. There are two things that I settle on. One is it has to do with mortality, right? A lot of people's philanthropy is the result of the death of a loved one, or I have one client who became the sole beneficiary of a relatively large-sized family foundation because of the death of 3 of his closest relatives who he really liked, and he approached his giving with a tremendous amount of sadness. The other issue is they get hung up on doing it right? Like there is, you know, that there's some magic formula, there's some absolute right way to do this. And it makes sense when you're working with people who've been very successful in the business community. They're looking for a profit-loss equation that simply does not exist in philanthropy. And so one of the things I do with my clients, one is to help them have fun, but to give them a different orientation to their giving. Largely I have them think about philanthropic dollars as high-risk venture capital, right? And not only that, and the way that you look at social change is like rolling a very large boulder up a very steep hill. Most things don't really work. And so when you actually go into philanthropy, it's not about whether the thing is going to be perfect and work. You're really investing in the leadership. You're investing in somebody who's trying to do something really hard, and they're going to give it their all. So one of the things I say is, like, if it doesn't work, that's okay. If it doesn't work, you take the lessons learned, you incorporate it into the way that you approach your search for the next thing that you might want to fund.
It's okay to fail.
It's okay to
fail.
No,
I think it's true. I work with a lot of donors who are almost like a paralysis mode, right? Where they don't feel like they have the full understanding of what they're doing. So I think that's important to keep in mind. And then obviously with the values conversation and thinking internally about what's important to you. So Caroline, share some stories with us about some of the funders you've worked with at the Community Foundation, whether it's individual donors or families. How have you seen folks kind of bringing this all together in terms of a giving plan?
Absolutely. I think one of the things, and I love what both of you said, the values are really important. The letting perfection go is really important. I think one of the biggest missed opportunities we see every time with donors, with fund holders, is writing it down, is putting pen to paper and really understanding, how do we capture how we feel today? And it's okay, similar to the perfectionism piece, it's okay if that changes over time. And what are those mechanisms and models that we can leverage, that we leverage every day at the foundation through documenting what are people's values? What kind of impact do they want to have? What are their goals with their giving, whether they're starting out or that's really informed and really structured, is documenting it so that we can come back to that. And again, it's not a roadmap to say you did it wrong. It's not a roadmap to point out how you failed. Those are actually really big strengths, and it's a really great way to, especially for a family, to bring a family together to have those conversations around a table, comfortably, to say what made sense here, what didn't go well, and how do we recalibrate, how do we move forward, how do we adjust, and how do we adjust what's on paper so that there is this paper trail to say, look at what we've accomplished. And it does give a huge sense of success to the families and to the individuals that we're working with. But writing it down is the biggest thing, and it's those prompts, right? So we have tools to be able to support people through everything from a very, very formal plan to just a conversation and questions. I sit with donors all the time, some of them in this room, to ask, what worries you about the world today? What bothers you in the news? What are you hearing that just doesn't sit right with you? And then how do we think about how that translates to giving, to mission-based work, to what's happening locally or whichever community they've identified that they'd like to have an impact in, and really starting to sort of flesh that out and formalize it. And then the other thing about values, especially, that we see through the multi-generational approaches and the next generation sort of approaches is honoring parents and honoring families' wishes, and that, I consider it storytelling, right? We make memories and we tell stories through families. Giving can be a really great vehicle for capturing how families carry that through generationally. But what tweaks are being made, right? So how do you want to honor your family's past or your family's current, and what does the future hold? So it's okay to have it be a duality and both as part of the picture.
And I promised the panelists I would share a few of my tools, and I think this is a good prompt. So this costs $4 on Amazon. It's a giant Post-it note. That's what you're thinking it is. I've worked with families before where they're struggling with, how do we get started? Like, how do we think about creating a mission statement or a vision statement? And so one December 23rd, I took a ferry to Bald Head Island, North Carolina. For those of you who may be familiar with it, it's hard to get to and cold on December 23rd. But I worked with 8 grandchildren where the parents had set up a donor advised fund, and the kids ranged from age 8 to 21. And to start, we asked everyone to put 3 words on their Post-it note of what they would want to capture for an overall family giving statement. And so it can be as easy as this around the holidays, or you're going away for the summer vacation, to just start to put pen to paper, and all ages can participate in it. And I'll save this one for later, which is the Picture Your Legacy, which is out in the book fair. But Miki, I know we talked a little bit about accountability, and it's fair to say you've worked with perhaps hundreds of donors at this point in your career. So what have you seen in best practices in terms of individuals and or families in terms of keeping themselves accountable?
I think tying together a lot of the themes that we've been hearing about, it's starting with a mindset shift, moving from a transaction of that ROI. If I spend X dollars, Y children will no longer have educational issues, or whatever it is, making that very simple sort of return on investment, to a mindset of learning, risk-taking, iterating, and then holding yourself accountable for really stepping back and learning and incorporating that learning. And so, to your point about the high-risk venture portfolio, it's having the conversation of, we're going to do this, we're going to see what happens, we're going to be in relationship perhaps with these grantees, we're going to think about what we're trying to accomplish, and then we're going to learn from that, and we're going to change and shift. So it's moving away from that idea that there's a silver bullet to we're learning, and that we're going to iterate and hold ourselves accountable for keeping that cycle going.
Is this working? Yes. Okay. Much better. Okay. Hopefully the hockey mom, I was loud earlier. So Miki, I'll stay with you for a second. So I know the National Center for Family Philanthropy created a resource called the Psychological Barriers for Giving or for Philanthropy. Can you talk about what was the origin story of why NCFP created that, and any particular key insights you would share from that resource?
Absolutely. So our CEO, Nick Tedesco, was part of the group that founded the Giving Pledge, so getting a lot of billionaires to decide that they want to put their money away. He was also an advisor to wealthy individuals, as I had been prior to my joining in CFP. And between us and other people on staff, we recognize that a lot of people have really wonderful intent. There's an intention to give. You want to make a difference. You're going to do something philanthropic, but what? And it's that but what that trips people up. And so we recognized that we could learn things from behavioral science. And so we were able to team with this wonderful group called Ideas 42, which is a behavioral research firm, and really look under what are the mental models that are stopping people from moving, and therefore how can we start to overcome them. And I think the kinds of barriers, and I think you're going to send out a link to this publication, that people run into are the common things. You don't have enough time. There are too many choices. You're trying to find the perfect solution. And what we see are that people get trapped really in a sense of perfectionism. And so it's that breaking that thing that there's no such thing as a perfect grant. We need to try and learn. And so we really wanted to put that out there to say to people, A, you're not alone. Lots of people are stuck. And what's important is to get moving and to find some help to get moving.
Do something.
Do something.
This is the moment.
If I could be slightly punny, there's a community foundation who I'll keep nameless for the moment, who's considering a campaign called Get Off Your Assets. So that is, that's the idea. There's a moment in time. We need to meet this moment in time, and assets will help.
Are they in the Midwest?
They are.
Oh, I know who they are. Okay. So, Orson, we're going to shift to some bigger themes. Again, hopefully all helpful information for folks who are either advising donors or donors themselves. So this phrase I think I heard several years ago for the first time, which is trust-based philanthropy. And I will say it's very counter from the early days in the development shop at Dana-Farber, where there was a woman I worked with that had this huge sign above her desk that said, "Donor is king." And that was the early aughts. So just to date myself a little bit, but tell us a little bit, or maybe define it for the room, trust-based philanthropy, and then if you're willing to share a few stories of how that's played out with some of your client work would be helpful.
Yes, so it's really interesting. I've been in philanthropy for roughly 20 years, but as a result, a lot of people have not stayed in philanthropy that long, so I end up having this institutional memory that a lot of other people don't have. So what you end up doing is you end up seeing cycles return. Trust-based philanthropy is really a form of general operating support. And for general operating, which before the 1990s, a lot of large foundations didn't so much give programmatic support, they gave general operating support. Then they were wondering, we don't have any metrics of whether this is not working, so they went to programmatic support. So the way that foundations gave was very hierarchical. This was the donor was king. They would give money, but they would put such rigid reporting requirements, rigid data collection requirements that the organization would have to take part of the money to hire somebody just to do the reporting for the foundation. And these were so intrusive that it ended up favoring very large organizations with lots of staff that could actually do all the reporting. One of the issues that happened was there were a lot of smaller organizations, particularly smaller organizations of color, who felt that they were being held to a higher standard and felt that they were caught in this vicious loop that, well, I can't get enough money to hire the people to allow me to grow, and back and forth, right? So one of you might have heard about trust-based philanthropy got a lot of attention during the pandemic because Mackenzie Scott gave these very large, no strings attached grants. And what she did was she picked organizations, she gave it to them, and she let them do with the money what they will. So if I have to give a definition of trust-based philanthropy, there are many official definitions, but the one that I like to think of it as, you get to know the organization, you build trust in the leadership, and then you back away and let them get to it and let them trust that they know what's best to do. I had one client during the pandemic, here's as an example, who was really concerned about low-income people losing their housing in New Bedford as a result of the pandemic. And yes, there were public programs, but she felt there were a lot of people that were going to be falling through the cracks. So she sent me to find a place where she could deposit the money with no questions asked, right? And that, where the organization would make the decision about where was the best place to deploy it. And not only was it the best, once the money was deployed, it was trusting the recipient, that the recipient knew what was best to do with the money. That sounds really revolutionary, but actually, or not revolutionary. It sounds really obvious, but the trend was in exactly the opposite direction. So if there's a whole practice around trust-based philanthropy. There's something called the Trust-Based Philanthropy Project, which has which is a network of foundations that are trying to move this whole area forward. If you want to learn the new practices around it, please go to their website and you can find out.
If I could just build on that for a second, because we're in partnership with the Trust-Based Philanthropy Project. In addition to their amazing website with all these resources, they have a call to action out right now to the donor community about actions you can take to help support vulnerable communities in this moment of chaos. So that's also, I think, worth taking a look at.
Yeah.
And I think one of the clients I work with, she was kind of overwhelmed. She's like, what does this mean? Am I doing this right or wrong? Again, kind of that obsession with doing things right. And her name's Debbie. And I said, listen, it's coming to the table with your grantees, the nonprofits you support, and asking, what do you need most? Like, how can I help you most? And listening. It's as simple as that, regardless of how much you give away. So Caroline, how does this play out, or how has this played out with the nonprofits that you work with, as well as the funders at the Community Foundation?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things, COVID, obviously you alluded to this, that COVID was a really big time for this movement to really pick up. There had been moments in our history at the foundation of taking trust-based philanthropy practices and implementing them over time. So it's been sort of a slow build over time, but really COVID was the time where we were able to really double down and truly, implement all that we felt we could that was right by our donors that are supporting our work to be able to do the grant making that we do in the community, but also for our community members and for our nonprofits. I mean, we were hosting weekly, I think it was, Matt can remind me, weekly calls with our grant partners who were receiving COVID relief funds to listen, to just understand what was happening, what else did you need, where were we doing things well, where did you need us to adjust. Being able to really listen, being able to center those relationships first really changed the game, and we were able to also release all restrictions on our funding. We had zero reporting for the first 2 years of COVID, no reports required. Our reports are now conversations, and those conversations are, again, not to report back on the use of dollars, but where are your continued challenges? Where have you seen success? How can we celebrate you? How can we continue to think about our priorities and the trends that are happening across the region to be able to calibrate our grant making? So having that embedded in the work of the foundation and our own grant making practices has been really important. And our nonprofits, the work getting done has been twofold, because they're not worried about coming back to us and reporting and having everything tied in a bow and being perfect. They're very real with us, and it helps inform our work, it helps improve our work, but they're also actually getting to do more work because they're not worried about what they're gonna say to us or the next report or the next time they have to go into the database to do something for us. And that has translated to our donor advised funds as well. We're able to leverage those practices to continue to educate and inform, to bring people along in the journey who are interested, both donors and donor advised fund holders, who are interested in this as well. And again, that perfectionism of, well, am I doing it right? There is no right. There are tools and ways to learn and places where you can calibrate and understand, again, documenting where it feels right for you and what are those incremental steps you can take to really reaching the level of what you want to reach within trust-based philanthropy.
And are you seeing most of the DAF account holders you work with give unrestricted gifts largely?
Yeah, so it's been really interesting. I think our fund holders don't necessarily recognize that they are being trust-based in their philanthropy practices. But when donors go in, and any of you who might make a gift and you write in a check or through a charitable giving account portal, when you write where it's needed most, you are being trust-based. That is allowing that nonprofit to do what they feel they need to do with the funding. And you're giving them, you're alluding to them and giving them a nod to say, I don't necessarily require a ton of reporting or feedback or acknowledgements, that they just trust that you're going to do the work, and they want you to do the work because they believe in your mission. So we've seen a huge shift in that trend and that language continuing to be used more and more every day.
There's a fact out there. There's a think tank called the Donor Advised Fund Research Collaborative. It's out of Brigham Young University. That 60% of all DAF gifts are actually unrestricted. So I would say largely leaning in the right direction in terms of trust and trust-based philanthropy. Let's talk about DAFs. They're one of my favorite things to talk about, if anyone ever wants to follow up on that. Caroline, can you define for the room, in case folks aren't familiar with DAFs, what they are and how they work, and maybe why are they so popular right now?
Yeah, so DAFS is the very popular acronym. We love to use acronyms in philanthropy if anyone's been in our world. But donor advised funds have been a really, really growing trend in being charitable and philanthropic. They are tax deductible charitable giving accounts. So it's like your savings or your checking account, but just for charitable giving. So it is restricted to that. It can only ever be used for that again once you put it into a charitable giving account and a donor advised fund. And some of the reasons why we're seeing people really love DAFs, they come to us and they say, I get to make one tax deductible donation. I chase one tax deduction receipt for my taxes next year. And then they make those grants from there. And then, other things, the anonymity for a donor advised fund is really important that we're seeing some significant value in. Not everybody wants to be anonymous when they're a donor advised fund holder, but it does add a layer of anonymity if you're interested in not being known to the nonprofits, if you're not sure that you want everyone knowing sort of where you're giving and how you're investing in community. And then the other big thing is we're seeing from a next gen standpoint that our next generations that are from the transfer of wealth are not interested in running and managing family foundations. They are burdensome, they are challenging sometimes, and so donor advised funds are a great alternative to that.
Yeah, so I think $275 billion is what the total assets in all DAFs in the country, total assets right now, and they've grown 85% over the past 5 years. So if you haven't heard about them, you will at some point soon. So Caroline, if I can stay with you, let's talk a little bit about what the foundation is doing to support the DAF account holders in being more philanthropic and helping guide them.
Yeah, I mean, we are continuing every day to develop tools. This is a growing area of focus at the foundation. It's everything from meeting brand new donors who are new in their journey in charitable giving. You don't have to be well equipped or long time in your journey. We support people at all levels and sort of at all times in their journey. And there are tools from co-investment opportunities. So opening the opportunity to say, these are all the grant applications we received. We can't fund them all. Here are some opportunities for you to learn a little bit more in depth about what's happening in the region and to be able to co-invest with us. To giving area landscape tools to be able to explore on your own an area of focus that you might be interested in, but you're not sure where to start. And again, it's that paralysis of not knowing where to start.
I'll let you take a sip of water, yes. And I know the foundation also launched a virtual series called Community Conversations for their DAF account holders. The first one was in early April around education in MetroWest, and the next one I believe is soon, I don't know where Matt is. End of June on workforce development in MetroWest. So again, just tools and resources to help support the DAF account holders at the foundation. Miki and Orson, anything to add on the DAF front?
I'll just add something one of the things that I like about DAFs is DAFs are an excellent tool for somebody at the beginning of their giving journey because it's a way to learn about philanthropy. It's a way to test some things, and the thing that we saw during the pandemic, it's not just is it flexible, it's also a type of just-in-time funding. So we saw that during the pandemic. DAFs were able to dispatch money at such an incredible rate. If you've ever worked for a large foundation, getting large foundations to get money out the door is like trying to make a dinosaur run. They are simply not set up for that. One of the things that we did see was the power of DAFs, and I have a client now who is very concerned about the impact of ICE deportations in Boston. And so we've started with, okay, how does she wants to make investments to help the families of people, the families that are left behind. But with every headline, she wants to do more. And so one of the things that we're doing is we're now creating a giving circle with her friends. We're trying to do all of these. There's all of these other things that you can do if you figured out something that you're passionate about, and if you figure out something that you really want to do something about. There are all sorts of ways you could do it. You could do it through the community foundation, through people like us. That's what I have to say.
And I'll just make explicit what you were making implicit, which is that DAFs solve a lot of the barriers to giving that can be out there. Some of the things like burdensome and administrative tasks. Family foundations or independent foundations simply take a certain degree of administration that the community foundation or other DAF providers do for you. It helps you get more information because you can tie into the knowledge of the community foundation. And we see a lot of families who have foundations setting up sidecar DAFs for the next generation to, again, practice that giving. It's a great way of getting people started.
That is a perfect segue. So we've talked about trust-based philanthropy, we've talked about donor-advised funds. Now we're going to talk a little bit about the next gen. So I'm sure you've all heard the stat, by 2048, 124 trillion will be passed on from the silent generation / boomers. 18 trillion of that is already set up in charitable bequests. So a lot will be coming to charitable organizations in the coming years. Miki, obviously you work for the National Center for Family Philanthropy. What are you seeing, most recently in terms of the ways families are engaging the next gen? I've seen a lot of the practice of opening DAFs so they can move those philanthropic muscles, but what else are you seeing that's working well for families in engaging the next gen?
Well, so interestingly enough, we just published what we call our Trends 2025 survey. Every 5 years, the National Center takes a look at family philanthropy in a national cut with a statistically representative sample of families. This is now our third study. So we have data now spanning 10 years, 3 data points. And what we see is that families all say we want to engage, or almost all say we want to engage the next generation, the younger members of our family, and yet over the last 10 years, there's been this dramatic drop-off in the ways in which families are actually engaging. And so some of the things that are being used are junior boards or associate boards, depending on, there's some bristling by some of the younger family members that junior feels too junior. And also sometimes the next gen is in their 50s, so that's a whole nother conversation. But that being said, we do see family conversations about values. We see going together on site visits. We see setting up DAFs for people to do some grant making. And I've seen some interesting practices. I think of one family that I worked with that were bringing on a group of teenagers, just really beginning to position this group of cousins, 7 cousins who spanned the ages 13 to 18. And what they were going to do is each cousin had a pool of up to $2,500 that they could make the case for to the family about why they wanted that grant to be made. It could be a simple presentation, 5 minutes about why the local animal society. But I thought really interestingly, because this is a family that really intended the family to govern together in years to come, they had a $10,000 pool that they had to agree on as the group of cousins. And so it was teaching those decision-making skills and building those muscles. And so you see, I think, a range of ways that people are engaging.
Yeah, and the family I referenced in Bald Head Island, it was, I think they allotted, like a $500 to each of them, but they had to come with a report, and as young as 8, which was really cute, to be able to share that with them and kind of, again, learn and grow together. And the 20-something cousins were the ones in charge of the whole process. Go ahead, Orson.
Can I ask you a question about this?
Sure.
When we first met, there are instances where family foundations are being dissolved and turned back into DAFs because the family can't agree. Can you talk to that? Because that was your... Sure.
So I would say, I call it the collective model. So I would say maybe 1 out of every 4 instances, there was a very functional family where a collective model made sense. Where there was agreement, they aligned on the mission statement, the process, and you can set up almost like a governing process for a DAF too. And so I would say that was 25% of the families I worked with. I think the rest really saw that folks had moved all over the country, there were different interests, and there wasn't as much alignment. So then they would open individual DAFs. The foundation would split into those donor advised funds. So I've seen it done a bunch of different ways, but I would say most often the individual model has been working best. But I do think it's a great tool for folks. I worked with one family, a lot of cousins, where they were expected to take a more formal role with the private foundation for the family, but the parents were saying they don't really even know what they're doing. Like, how do we get them going? And so they did open the small donor advised funds for them to have their own independent interests and start to, again, kind of move those philanthropic muscles. So I've seen it a variety of ways. In the end, everyone kind of gravitates towards what is right. Otherwise, it does not end well, is what I've seen. Caroline, let's talk about youth and philanthropy. I was very proud. I'm a part of a national group of philanthropic advisors, and there's an email thread that just goes all day long, but somebody was asking about what next gen programs are out there? And this was someone out in California, and Youth and Philanthropy program for MetroWest made the list. I did not put it there, someone else had suggested it. I was very proud for you. Tell us about the program. I know you're a graduate of it.
I am. We had a lot of great conversation at our table about it. No, so as I said, my introduction to philanthropy and this whole sector and this whole world was through the Youth and Philanthropy program when I was a high schooler. So it is a 17-week free program, mostly for high schoolers in the region. We graduate about 200 to 250 students every year through the program. And they go through this rigorous, well-structured, formalized curriculum with fantastic instructors and wonderful guides through the process to learn about what is a nonprofit, what does this whole sector look like, what does it mean, what is philanthropy, and how do they understand both collectively what philanthropy is, and then start to build their own individual paths to philanthropy and what it means to them personally. They learn about community needs through our indicators website, so they really dig into the data and understand sort of what's driving community from a data perspective. And then they read real grant applications that are submitted to us by youth-serving nonprofits. So it is a youth-serving youth model. They read those grant applications, they go on site visits, they come to consensus, they go through those challenging decision-making processes. We just had graduation for 2 of our cohorts on Tuesday night, and it is always so inspiring because I think one of the really key things and what I love most about this program is our young people, first of all, we're in really good hands, so feel really, really secure in that. But they are so responsible. They are so unjaded in how they view the world. They are so thoughtful and intentional about their giving, and they take it very seriously. And I think when we give young people more opportunity to take on that responsibility, they rise to the occasion every time. And I think it really translates to that next generation that will be leading philanthropic efforts as personally, professionally. I think we're in really good hands because they are totally equipped. And they bring themselves to it, and it's just a really wonderful collective model to be able to go through and to watch them sort of explore this reality.
So you've mentioned to me you've seen a little bit of shift in terms of kind of interest in their approach, and actually a lot more interest in like a model like the action projects. Can you talk a little bit about what's going on there and what you're seeing?
Yeah, so it's been really interesting. We have had some leadership opportunities for our Youth and Philanthropy alumni for a while, and one of the groups actually made an opportunity. They got to explore a bunch of different nonprofits across the region. They actually chose to give to one of our action projects internally at the foundation. And they really loved, and we're seeing this more and more with the next generation, is this collective impact. How can they band together on a larger issue, a larger community challenge? And our action projects are data-oriented, rooted in data, really significant community challenges like workforce development and economic mobility, like equity and education, housing and homelessness prevention, very significant challenges that we're thinking about how do we collectively pool resources to have a greater impact, to test some things, to take those risks. It's sort of like the R&D sector. We like to consider ourselves that R&D model of philanthropy, to be able to try some things and take some risks with pilots, to be able to test the waters, to move things forward. And our students and young people, other young fund holders that I work with, young adults are really gravitating towards, how do I make my dollars go further? So that collective impact model has been really, really interesting to see grow.
So we have to wrap. I think you can tell we'd probably stay here all day having chats about philanthropy and how to inspire you more. Hopefully you gleaned something helpful today from this conversation. I'm going to ask each panelist to share either final words of wisdom and or what they suggested for the book fair. So we have a bunch of books out there in the hallway, as well as some really fabulous cards here called Picture Your Legacy cards. So Miki, I'll start with you. Any either final words or recommendations of what you've suggested out at the book fair?
I'll put them together. Okay. So the book I recommended is called The Big We by Holly Lee, and it's about collective giving at the individual level outside of institutional philanthropy. And I think it does a couple of great things. It reminds us about how we need to move from a frame of me to we, and that be part of a collective response, and that there is joy rooted in giving, and that we need to remember that yes, this is work, we need to look at things, we need to build relationships, we need to take it seriously, and there is a joy in being able to be part of a we and to be part of the solution.
Thank you. Orson?
I'm going to echo Carol O'Neill in that, the ability to have excess resources, time, knowledge, and money to give away is a wonderful privilege. So please find your passion, take the risk, and then get some help. And so I say get some help because Boston is an incredible philanthropy town, and has been for quite a long time, not just because of the amount of wealth that's in this community, but because of the amount of wealth, it's also become a place of nonprofit innovation. So some of the best models that are being replicated around the world for social change actually happen here. So get help from people like the Community Foundation, people like us, and actually go out and go visit some of the places that are doing incredible work and try to work together.
Caroline?
I'm just going to echo the perfectionism piece. Just start somewhere. Do something. If you're not sure where, reach out to us, reach out to them. Consider the resources. Don't be afraid to say, I don't know where to start. There's no worry about not doing it right. You need to just start somewhere, and there's a lot of opportunity to give. There's a lot of need out there, and there's a lot of great work happening, as Orson said. And I'll just say my book fair ad was The Last Stop on Market Street by Matt de la Peña. It is one of the children's books. I've read it 1,000,000 times with my son, who's now 8.5, and we have a method of having these conversations internally and talk about giving all the time. For his 7th birthday, he actually, instead of asking for gifts, he asked for people's favorite boxes of cereal so we could donate it to the food pantry, because he wanted everybody to be able to have his favorite boxes of cereal, which is really lovely. And I think, books like this, I think it's those nods to simple things, seemingly simple things, and seemingly obvious things like gratitude and kindness and empathy, and picking your head up and starting to flex that muscle of looking at the world around them and not always being so focused on themselves. And naturally, kids are focused on themselves, and that's okay, and that's where they should be in many ways. But there is also a real wonderful benefit of using reading and family conversations around the dinner table or around a book. And this book has just been one of our favorites that's been on our bookshelves for a long time. So check it out.
Yeah. I want to thank the panelists. It's been a treat for me to sit up here with friends. So I think the offer is real. If anyone wants to chat with us about how we can help in any way, any of us would be very willing to chat with you. Jay and team, thank you for being amazing hosts this morning. And with that, we'll conclude our panel discussion. Thank you.